Habari gani, karibuni, asanteni for being with us. It is good to be back in conversation with you all. It's been a while. It's strange that we haven't seen you in the last, just quickly adding my sister to the stage, seen you in the last 2 weeks. But here we are back again for our regular Sunday conversations. The name is Nduku Mulumba. I am one of the co-hosts on Kumbukeni. We are here to decolonize our African minds together, and also to counter the false narrative that the Western media has propagated against Africa and Africans for centuries, finally telling our story ourselves. So brothers, my sister, please introduce yourself.
Yes, this is Ojigila here, reaching you from the United Kingdom, London, the heart of empire. And as they will say in Yoruba, Ekudede Woyi, which is welcome to this particular period in time. Over to you, Brother Milton.
Yes, karibuni. Welcome to our global weekly chuo kikuu. Chuo kikuu is a Kiswahili word for university. I think we have a wonderful conversation, something that always people think about, and we'll get into that in a minute. I'm Milton Alimadi, based here in the United States, the remaining declining European empire, as new empires rise to the occasion. Karibuni.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anita Ranoba Isaiah. I am in the motherland, Africa, Botswana. I am a journalist by profession. Yes.
Gnaka Lagoke, do us the honors, please.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Gnaka Lagoke. I am a teacher at Lincoln University, assistant professor of history and Pan-African studies, and then I am an advocate of Pan-Africanism, of a new dispensation which stands upon the Ubuntu philosophy. It's a pleasure for me to be here so that we can have a nice conversation with Nduku, Hilton, and then Adisoji, and then Anita, whom I have encountered for the first time through internet yesterday.
Yes. And in Kiswahili, we have a saying that says the guest on the first day is a guest, the second day they're a guest, the third day you give them the tools and they go to the shamba and work. So Lagoke, now you've gotten your tools, you're part of the family. We are in the shamba.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
The reason why I was interested in us having this conversation is because of the current state of affairs of Africans on the continent, where Kwame Nkrumah says one of the essential things that we should have is power over our economic, cultural, political, and social status. And currently in Africa, I don't think we have that. And therefore, as we analyze the situation and look at the different issues, I wanted us to talk about this question and to address it, because what it means essentially is who has the right to the land, who has the right to the politics, who has the right to the economics, who has the right to the cultural decisions that are being made there. So, brothers, let's get started. Who is an African? Why are you laughing?
Very good, I think. Gnaka Lagoke, you want to go first, or you want?
No, of course not. Yes.
Wait, with his laughter.
Okay, very good. So I think,
yeah,
I defer to our comrades in South Africa, because they have a very special experience in dealing with this issue, particularly even though Africa generally was colonized by and oppressed by European empire and capitalism. I think the South African experience has been quite unique in the level of its intensity. So I wanted to see what our fighters in South Africa, how they address this issue. So I went back to Robert Sobukwe's inaugural speech in April 1959 when he launched the Pan-Africanist Congress, the party. So I think I just need a minute or so to read from parts of that speech.
Yes.
Because the other section which actually says the race question. And this is what Sobukwe said. And now for the thorny questions of race. I do not wish to give a lengthy and learned dissertation on race. Suffice it to say that even these scientists who do recognize the existence of separate races have to admit that there are borderline cases which will not fit into any of the three races of mankind. All scientists agree that all men can trace their ancestry back to the first Homo sapiens. That man is distinguished from other mammals and also from earlier types of man by the nature of his intelligence. The structure of the body of man provides evidence to prove the biological unity of the human species. All scientists agree that there's no race that is superior to another. There's no race that is inferior to others. The Africanists take the view that there's only one race to which we all belong. That is the human race. In our vocabulary, therefore, the word race as applied to man has no plural form. We do, however, admit the existence of observable physical differences between various groups of people. But these differences are the result of a number of factors, chief among which has been geographical isolation. In Africa, the myth of race has been propounded and propagated by the imperialists and colonialists from Europe in order to facilitate and justify the inhuman exploitation of the indigenous people of the land. It is from this myth of race, with its attendant claims of cultural superiority, that the doctrine of white supremacy stems. Thus, it is that an ex-Indian driver can think of himself as fully qualified to be the head of the government of an African state, but refuse to believe that a highly educated Black doctor, more familiar with Western culture than the white premier is, cannot even run a municipal council. I do not wish to belabor this point. Time is precious. Let me close discussion of this topic by declaring, on behalf of the Africanists, that with UNESCO, we hold that, quote, every man is his brother's keeper. For every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main, because he is involved in mankind. End quote. Just another quick section from the same speech. Quote, we aim politically at government of the people, government of the Africans, by the Africans, for the Africans, with everybody who owes his only loyalty to Africa and who is prepared to accept the democratic rule of an African majority being regarded as an African.
And just to add to what, because I think it's related to what Alimadi said, so that we can jump off these 2 points, Sobukwe's speech and this agreement or a decision that was made at the All African People's Conference held in Accra, Ghana on December 8th to 13th in 1958. So they had foreigners in the space when they were making this decision. And they agreed that anyone living in Africa, white or Black, could be part of the Africa of the future, so long as the basic principle of democracy, and it's in quotes, they have one man, one vote, is accepted. So taking those 2, and Tom Boyer at that same gathering said that we will not practice racism in reverse. Taking those 2 arguments or observations and looking at Africa today, where we are, and the situation of Black Africans, the inhabitants of Africa, the indigenous peoples of Africa, where they are today, given the presence of foreigners in Africa. Let's have this conversation.
Okay, so I'll pass it on. I'll only add to one thing before I pass it on. I'll add that the struggle we have is against capitalism and imperialism exploitation. And that historically has always been accompanied by race or racism, because race and racism has also been used as a very effective tool of division to disguise class segmentation and to disguise the fact that the owners of capital are most likely always the who benefit the most by promoting and disseminating white supremacy and the ideology of racism.
But we also have to acknowledge, I agree with you, Alimadi, but we also have to acknowledge, as much as race is a false notion, we also have to acknowledge that it has some real life impact on the African.
Of course, absolutely it does. In fact, they take, sometimes working people take ownership. And as Rodney observed, he can understand that kind of so-called racism. But look at the fact that they're actually working against their own best interest. So they're working so engaged in working against their own best interest that they're not able to observe who is gaining from that intra fight within the same working class. And for people who are not familiar with it, I highly recommend there's a video on YouTube, a lecture that Walter Rodney gave at Columbia University called Race and Class in Guyanese Politics. And he breaks it down on several multi-levels. I pass it on.
All right. Adesoji.
I would go to, what's his name? First and foremost, I will go to Amilcar Cabral, where he says, hide nothing from the masses of the people, tell no lies, expose lies wherever they are told, make no difficulties, mistake, failures, claim no easy victories. Why did he say that? We could draw parallels from the experience of, I'm going to read now from just a short excerpt from Imperial Reckoning by Caroline Elkins. I was sitting at that actual desk when I signed your detention order 20 years ago. I know, Jomo Kenyatta told him. If I had been in your shoes at the time, I would have done the same. The nervousness immediately evaporated from the room. Everybody erupted in relieved laughter. With everyone still chuckling, the new president said, without missing a beat, I myself have signed a number of detention orders sitting right there. Kenya jails are already beginning to fill up with detainees when the new government had barely gotten its legs underneath the table, because apparently there is a threat to the new democracy. Now, the question of who Africans are can be looked through a couple of prisms, but I will try to stick to the issue of who has your best interests, who is able to place themselves in the cause of harm to the personal security, and not just on the hue of the people. Why do I say that? In the same Kenya, there was a guy, Pio Gama Gio. Pio Gama Gio, for those people who don't know, is of Indian descent. He was executed assassinated in 1965. A lot of fingers were pointed at the government in power. The same can be said for anybody else. But then again, if we're to go by the fact that if Jomo Kenyatta can sign the detention orders of people who fought in the same cause as he did, what is there to say somebody who is an irritant will not be gotten rid of? So, I mean, we could look in the course of our discussion, I'll bring up so many other examples. But for me, it's not a question of how you look. It's a question of how you move. And I'll give you so many examples that will make your eyes water. So for me, I'm inclined to look at how you move. And there are lots of people who have moved, not to the best of interest of people who look like you and I, or everybody on this stage. So over to
Sister Anita. Since we have you for a short time, I'll let you go and share your thoughts on this, please.
Who is an African? interesting and contradicting in so many ways. My brother just stated that how you move can depict if you are an African. And I want to back his words up because we have realized that color, even though there's racism, and racism is very crucial in from history to where we are now, color doesn't identify an African. Just because we are black doesn't make us African. We can be black, but our mentality cannot be African.
Mm-hmm.
So how we move, how we analyze things, how we prioritize our culture, how we put first our history, and how we want Africa to be represented can tell who is an African.
Gnaka Lagoke. I agree with you, Sister.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks, people. It's a pleasure. Like I said, and Anita, I think you may want to call your people and say that you're going to go late to the meeting. So I think that would be like the wise thing to do. You can call it now. Yeah, so you have to stay till
Pressure.
so that we can finish this, so that we can finish this. Okay, so I thank you so much for many of the wonderful things that I heard. There are some I was not familiar with, and then I am glad, when we do show, even though you call as an expert, we cannot pretend to know all the aspects of a particular topic. So, I love it. Anita said something. I just wanted to add one more thing to that. Frantz Fanon wrote a great book about that. So what is the title? Peau Noire, Max Blanc, like white skins, and then what?
Black mask.
No.
Black
White
skin.
mask. Black skin, white mask.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, so it summarizes what Anita just said. That's one thing I wanted to add.
Yes,
And
that's a good point.
What is that?
That's a good point. Some people who are not familiar with that book, it's a must read.
Yes, yeah. So because even when we were preparing the show, I forgot to talk about that when Nduku was talking about what was stuff. So that's one thing. So several elements. So of course, this topic can be discussed from different perspectives. We have what I know the one Nduku was thinking about it is that race issue. But it can be about geography, it can be about race, it can be about national or African identity. When I say identity, when you talk respective countries, and then several other elements. As I was preparing this show, like all of us we did, I saw like a nice thing that maybe I should have sent it to you. I saw what Nduku was saying. So people were saying, why people cannot be Africans? They can have the national identity of belonging to respective countries, but they cannot be Africans. But anyway, that is the debate. We go back to Kwame Nkrumah again. One of his favorite quotations, I am not African because I was what?
Born in Africa.
Born in Africa, but because what? Africa was what?
Was born in me.
But he's speaking of Black people, and he's speaking of the diaspora outside of the borders of Africa, still concentrating on Black people. He's talking about Americans, the Caribbeans, and all that, not white people when he says that. But let's go on.
Okay, I'm not saying that he was thinking about white people. I'm talking about the definition, like on a theoretical level, it is a novel approach to the African identity by saying that I was not born. It's not because I was born in Africa, I'm an African, because that Africa that is Dream Africa, that Africa of cultural, the political, economic, identity or sovereignty, that it was the embodiment, or it was trying to express that Africa. Then this was going to somehow go a little bit beyond the idea of what race as being the exclusive way of defining who is an African, who is not an African. So for me, we have to look at that. But one thing I wanted to say is that, and I'm glad Anita is here. I went to South Africa in 2018. And then 2018, I was there at a conference on decoloniality. And there are some people in South Africa. I would think that Mandela is
South Africa or Southern Africa?
No. Anita, I know the difference. South Africa, Pretoria. Okay, I was in, I was in Are you right? I was in Pretoria at the conference on decoloniality. It was the second time. And I've seen black South Africans, like brilliant, the fiery, at times ferocious, revolted, and attacking. And I saw that many of them somehow were saying that Mandela was not like, Mandela was like, some of them were implying that Mandela was a sellout. And then as I was giving my presentation, I did something and I was so shocked. I was saying, there are some white people who supported our struggle. If I knew, they came after me. And there is one lady who said that sometimes, when we want to go after white people, sometimes we wonder if we should not start with people like you Africans. She's talking to me. So over there, they're South Africans, but when they talk about you Africans, she's talking about those blacks who are not South Africans. And then, as she was saying, even though she seemed to be knowledgeable, she was so ignorant. She told me that the only Africans who support them in the struggle was people from Zimbabwe. Then she did not know anything about Kwame Nkrumah, about Nyerere, about Gamal Abdel Nasser, about all those people. And then she said that. And then for them, it looks like there was nothing good that can come from white people, or it looks like there were no white people who supported the struggle. Huge ignorance. It's a huge ignorance and a big ignorance, because not only we know the names of Joe Slovo, Rufus, and so many other people in South Africa, Patrick Duncan, and then his wife, many other white people who were there, when apartheid was so vicious, there were some white people in South Africa who stood on the side of Africans, of blacks, in order to fight against injustice. Many of them were not claiming to be Africans, but in the name of humanity and internationalism, they did that. And I was so shocked because, listen, Mandela's biggest, like when he left South Africa, when he was freed, I think the first country he visited outside South Africa was what? Cuba. And Fidel Castro, even though he's in South America or Central America, Fidel Castro is not black at all.
No.
And then we know how Castro sent some people there who bled and who died for the freedom of Angola, of many colonies of Portugal, and then that impacted the process of decolonization in Southwest Africa, which is now Namibia, and this was going to lead to the freedom of Nelson Mandela. So as we are talking, the people I just mentioned, here there are many other here in the United States.
Yeah.
The people I mentioned, when you talk about who is an African, some of them claim to be Africans. I cannot reject those people who have contributed to the restoration of the Africa's dignity, while many blacks that we can find in different institutions during slavery and colonialism sided with the Europeans to sell the brothers and the sisters. So for me, a white person can be African as long as that person claims his or her Africanness, and the person has at his or her heart the interest of the continent of Africa. That is my position.
Yes. So
I have like a minute or so, 2 minutes before I leave you guys. I could see the pain in your voice when you articulated your answer. And I want to say, Southern Africa, it's I don't know how to put it without being, I don't know the right term to use, but I'll just say it. You correct my English. In Southern Africa, I realized that we don't know our history. Or maybe we don't want to acknowledge the history makers, whether black, white, Chinese, Indian, or whatever race they may be. Everyone at some point played a part. There were times when white women stood with black women to fight the oppressors. So this what you're saying, even to this day, takes place. It's there, it's reality. Where they say Nelson Mandela is a sellout. He might be a sellout because of 1, 2, 3 reasons, but had he not taken the decisions he had taken at that time, at that space, would he had set South Africa free? Would South Africa be where it is today? We don't take these things into consideration. If any one of them in the many million numbers they are, would anyone sacrifice themselves to be in Mandela's shoes? What difference would they have made?
Nothing.
So for them to say Mandela is a sellout, they should first walk in his shoes and acknowledge where he has gone wrong and where he has gone right. So that conversation is reality and we cannot change it, unfortunately. Everyone has their own reason to why they say Mandela is a sellout. But when it comes to our history, like I always say, we need to rewrite our history. It doesn't matter when or where, but our history needs to be rewritten. We need to acknowledge everyone, whether black, white, green, or red, whatever color you are, whatever role you played or you are playing, you need to be acknowledged. This is the history that even us in Africa need to learn. Now, the painful part about the way Africa is right now is that in Southern Africa, we are somewhat too modern. And we wash our African. And then in the other sides of Africa, they are African, they are proud of being African, and they are showing the struggle of Africa and they're fighting for this Africa. But then with us this side, it's a struggle. It is a struggle because we are mostly focusing on what has happened and getting our land back. So when you say who is African, then that is where we need to write our history. Go back to the drawing board and see who has done what role they played, who has died for this black skin, yet they were not black. That is why I'm saying we cannot call out racism when it comes to who is African. Because if we are to call in the color, then we're going to destabilize the whole conversation. We are going to neutralize it. Because there are so many people who played a role in this who are not Africans. So I urge you, please go back to South Africa and teach them afresh.
Yeah, tell those people. So Anita, did you call your people? You still want to go?
You know what? When you get to your meeting, if you can sneak out, just feel free.
Come back if you can get away.
I'll try. I'll definitely try and check in this conversation.
Lagoke is being persistent. He is not.
Yeah, we'll be here till 1:30.
Because at least I know and Milton and Abdul we can agree on many things. But I need you to support us against Nduku because when you leave, she's going to come after all of us.
Listen, this is not that serious. Wait a minute, I'm about to show you I'm a reasonable human being. Hold on, Anita, please go and see if you can get out of that meeting. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Next time.
Yeah.
Have a nice day.
Right.
So I was gonna say, as I was thinking about this, because I have been accused of reverse racism, right? My issue, and for those of you who know me, I am appreciative of the John Browns, right? I am appreciative and I am acknowledged. I see Che Guevara more of an African than all the current presidents of Africa. Honestly, that I'm saying that blunt and plain, and I'm not taking it back. Che Guevara was more African than all the current presidents of Africa. So I get this, Aggie.
Hugo Chavez.
Listen, I get it. The thing that concerns me, and I'll come back to what I finally came down to as far as who's an African. The thing that gets me is those who are in Africa who invaded, took land, right, and have not given it back. Those who are in Africa who are monopolizing business, who are taking business and exploiting Africans and treating Africans in an ill way. I'm talking about those who are in Africa sabotaging any Africa development, right? We're talking about the people that Nkrumah invited, that he later regrets inviting, who sabotaged his government and led the coup. Those are the individuals we're talking. And so when we accept everyone, based on who they are and not how they look. How are we to protect Africa from those who look a certain way, who are there to exploit, subjugate, oppress, and take over our motherland? The other thing that I was thinking as I thought of this conversation and the need for it is lately I've been thinking of the state of the indigenous peoples of Americas. These are people who were wiped out on their own land. And today they have no rights. Like really, when you think about it, they have no rights to practicing their culture, to ownership of the land. The land is owned by people who invaded. The law is of people who invaded. The culture is of people who invaded, and they're forced to assimilate on their own motherland. So those are the two things. But when I was looking at it and thinking, because I went to some brothers who I reach out to just to make sure that I'm not being unreasonable and just to get other opinions to center me. And I said, who is an African to you? And we all had this agreement. An African is a person who practices Ubuntu. So and this clears up the Black issue, right? If you're an African who appears heavily melanated and you're not practicing Ubuntu, you're not observing the 7 principles, the Nguzo Saba, you're not centering all your activities on umoja, kujichagulia, ujima, ujamaa, nia, kuumba, and imani, and then living that spirit where all your actions are supposed to promote the well-being of the collective of Africans on that planet. If you're that person who's not doing that, then you do not deserve to be called an African. That's where I landed on. So an African is a person who observes Ubuntu. So
you're eliminating 90% of melanated Africans by that definition.
And I guess that's okay. I guess that's okay, because we need to get clear on who is an African.
And then you do not have the right to eliminate them.
I just did. And you can all send them the memo.
Right. I think what Sister Ndoko you're saying, there's the Africa that we aspire to. And I think that's also partly what Sobukwe was actually saying. He was acknowledging the presence of Europeans there. He was acknowledging what had happened. And what he was saying was that they are in a dominant position, politically, economically, militarily, and whatnot. But he says, so long as they are accepting that they can be loyal to a government where the majority are going to be melanated Africans, they too have the claim and right to be Africans. They too are Africans, in fact, once they accept those conditions.
That's it. That's the debate. I know that Adesoji want to react after you.
Because my thing before Adesoji goes quickly, this agreement in 1958 that an African is any person, white or black. First of all, there are so many colors between those two, if we are going to acknowledge that actually those are colors. But who observes democracy? When you think about democracy, it's a foreign culture, democracy in itself, and it hasn't served Africa. So I think they made a mistake.
There's a difference between parliamentary and African democracy. But go ahead.
Yes. So again, the democracy they were talking about is the democracy of the white man. I don't think it was. Yeah. So that decision should be looked at. It should be agreed. At least we should all agree that it has not served us, and we should see where we should move forward from now as far as who an African is. But Adesoji.
Yes, Dr. Lagoke, you quoted white skin, black. Finance,
black skin, white mask.
Yeah, finance epic book. Okay, so who was he referring to? There was one classic example of a human being he was referring to, and it was Leopold Senghor. Leopold Senghor said, and I quote, when he was asked about what does independence mean for him as an African, and someone said, so now we can go back to being Africans. He said, ha, 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 ha. No, we can go back to being black Frenchmen. But if you look at him, he was the proponent of the fast that is known as negritude, to which the other Africans basically rubbished. He was in the same country that undermined the very work between 1960 and 1980 of Cheikh Anta Diop at the University of Dhaka. in Senegal. So it's not so much as, I mean, we could pass looking at color and saying, oh, this means you're an African. And the Yorubas people don't practice Ubuntu. They don't.
They probably do, but go on. Mm-hmm.
No, they don't. I'm Yoruba, and I'm telling you, we don't. We don't.
Yeah.
So if
they probably do. It's not called Ubuntu. Like, let's all be reasonable, right? We're not talking about the name. We're talking about the practice.
They have
actions.
They have a Ajobi.
Yes.
Ajobi is centered on community.
Exactly, Ubuntu.
Yeah, but
that's how you guys
okay.
call it. But they don't practice. So, okay, you know your people, but
yeah, exactly. So
but
I'm just saying that. So now the reason I say that is this: the things we call ourselves in terms of, if we come into Africa and we go into and we're going to cross all those lines, we hold passports, and those passports are the framework created by by Europeans, right? So on that basis, that's how we define ourselves. Majority of us. That's the default position. If I ask you where you're from, the first thing you tell me you're from Cote d'Ivoire, you're from Uganda, you're from Kenya, you're from Nigeria. Those are default positions. But those lines are blurred for the people on the ground, because I was talking to a friend the other day, and we were having this conversation about the scramble for Africa, the partition of Africa. And the guy, he gave me an example of someone having their living room in one country and their bathroom in another country. How do you define that person? Do you define that person on the basis of those passports or the basis of their humanity? Now, he's not even told me who that person is. But that person is an African. So I think the generic brush of saying who is and who is not, I can give you a whole raft of examples. Mobutu is not an African.
No,
is he?
No, you can. This is what I'm saying. This Milton.
No, exactly.
No. At this age, you can't say Mobutu is not an African.
No, I'm asking the question, but it's a rhetorical question.
Yeah. So
I know he is.
Okay. Yes.
I know he is.
Okay.
But then, based on his practice,
he's not an African. I'll say that.
He is an African.
But go on. He's not. But go on.
He might be serving another. He might be serving a function.
Exactly. That's who he is. Yes. Thank you.
He might be serving a function, but he's an African.
Mm.
Moise Tishombe is an African. Patrice Lumumba is an African.
Yes, that's an African, 100%.
I mean, by the time we go through all this fine-tooth comb, by the time we go through all of that, you will find that you will chalk out so many people that you won't even have anybody to, which means, what do? My people have this saying. They will say, which is, if the death in your house does not kill you, the one outside cannot do anything to you. So if you empty your house out, guess what's going to come in? What you don't want to come in, because you don't have anyone to protect the place.
So here's my question, Adesoji. I hear you, but here's my question. We're talking about sitting as Africans today and analyzing our situation and figuring out a way to move forward, right? This is what we're talking about. And we are saying that we should all agree that to be an African is to be centered in the spirit of Ubuntu. The word is South African. The practice, the spirit is all over Africa, in all the cultures of Africa. It means you're centering the community and the well-being of the community. And whatever actions you take, you realize affect your community. So you are encouraged to take positive actions that affect your community in a positive way, and restrain from taking negative actions that affect your community in a negative way. So you're all arguing that we should not make the blanket statement that should be a requirement for someone to be African. We're all talking about how we're going to improve Africa and grow it. And you're fighting against that idea, trying to accommodate people who do not serve Africa. How do we even have hope that we are going to build Africa if the three brothers on stage with me are arguing that it is too much to ask that every Africa observe that spirit?
No one is.
Who said that?
Then please clarify. Tafadhali. Clarify, please, because that's what I'm hearing.
No one is against you.
We can rewind the tape, and you'll find that a moment
please
that nobody
clarify.
said that.
Let's clarify for the audience as well, in
there's
case
the Africa that we aspire to, and that is what you're talking about. That is obviously what we all want. Go back to what Adesoji said in the issue of melanation, pigmentation. Obviously, Museveni can say he's an African, and Europeans, every European would see Museveni as an African, Mobutu as an African, but Mobutu and Museveni do not represent the Africa that we aspire to, you see? So we as Africans can make that distinction. And obviously that's one of the, playing the Africa card was very effective to some of these neo-colonial leaders, right? Because they realized the power of mobilizing over the blackness in order to mobilize people against European imperialism, where the symbols were very obvious: European governors, European police commanders, army commanders. The top would be Europeans during the colonial era. So it was very easy to get every melanated person to join the struggle, mass mobilization. And after independence, many of them who became prominent, became either the president or the prime ministers, they kept exploiting, saying, oh, we are with you, because they're fellow melanated people. But their interests were no longer the same. They continue like being the comprador, serving the interest of foreign capital, foreign multinationals, foreign exploitation. But to the outside world, they can still couch themselves in nationalism. In fact, Mobutu has started Africanizing names, right? Zaire, yeah. The African attire, and so the symbolism was played up. Whereas he was working against the interests
and the well-being
class African countries, while taking advantage of the fact that yes, he's a melanated person, can just stand up there and espouse the rhetoric of Pan-Africanism and unity. So we have to make a distinction between those types of people. And obviously, when it comes to a choice, I would rather work with people like Ruth First, like Joe
Slovo.
Right.
Give me John Brown all day.
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
So one thing I wanted to say, to try and then add something a little bit to the conversation. So we have made some progress in this conversation. Like I said in the beginning, we can approach this conversation from different perspectives. It can be race, it can be geography, it can be ideology, it can be about vision, and so and so. It is believed and it is accepted that is an African, the original being of the continent, who are Black people. Those can be considered Africans by birth, by location, and then by race. And now we can have another category of Africans who are certainly the descendants of the invaders, be Arabs, whites, and then and be Arabs and whites, and then who claim the Africanness or the African identity the same way they could claim their respective national identities. And we have a third category. It is that of those who are the descendants of those who migrated to Africa as a place of refuge, or people who want, to have like a better life. Those Syrians and Lebanese,
right.
And then who fled their respective countries and found Africa as a place of refuge, and then they have done businesses of making money, and then their children, and then I see them being Ivory Coast, being Ghana, in different parts, who claim to be Africans, not because they are on the side of the oppressors or those who exploit, because they have fallen in love with Africa. So that is what the third category. And then we have the fourth category of people who married Africans, men and women, and then who claim, the respective national identities of the countries they are living in, and then who claim to be Africans. So this is, for me, we have to look at all those categories. And now, what Nduku is trying to do by saying that an African is a person who practices Ubuntu, this can be put, they can fall in line with the ideological definition of the Africanness of the African identity. Right. Because Nkrumah and others that did that. Like I said last time, and I'm saying it again, before 1958, people were African, they saw an African as a person who was black, who was living in Africa. And then there was a huge debate. And then at the conference of 1958, there were some notions that transcended the limits of black nationalism. Those notions are three. The first one is Pan-Africanism, that evolved from black nationalism to multiracial nationalism on the continent of Africa and beyond. The second one is the notion of African personality. Blyden used it in the context of black nationalism in the 19th century. But as Nkrumah was trying to find a way to bring Africans together on the ideological dimension, then Nkrumah used that word African personality, and then it encompassed like a multiracial dimension. And when he said, for instance, the Sahara no longer divides us, because the French wanted to explode the nuclear bombs in the Sahara in Algeria. So the Algerian revolution was in the central part of the African conversation about that African personality, and many others saw the concept of African personality as being multiracial. That was in the conference of the Independent African State, and also during the conference of the All African People's Conference in 1958 in December. And then the third notion is the notion of the African community. It was, of course, limited to black nationalism before 1958, but later on, after 1958, that concept became a multiracial concept. So that's why when we're having this conversation, we have to take all those elements into account. So, of course, if we talk about people who practice Ubuntu, listen, we may have some few Arabs and a few whites and a few Indians who will be more African than the majority, not the majority, be more African than many of the black Africans that we know, who are willing to serve the interests of the Europeans. So that is one I wanted to say in order to somehow reposition the debate about that notion of African identity. That's
Okay, so I would like to add to, because and identify with what Sister Nduku says when you talk about non-melanated people in Africa who are in dominant positions and continue to exploit, and sometimes the language that is used is hostile and very aggravating. So I want to read a little bit again from Sobukwe, because obviously in South Africa this was very intense too. So he says, in South Africa, we recognize the existence of national groups, which are the result of geographical origin within a certain area, as well as a shared historical experience of these groups. The Europeans are a foreign minority group, which has exclusive control of political, economic, social, and military power. It is the dominant group. It is the exploiting group responsible for the pernicious doctrine of white supremacy, which has resulted in the humiliation and degradation of the indigenous African people. It is this group which has dispossessed the African people of their land, and with arrogant conceit has set up itself as the guardians, the trustees of the Africans. It is this group which conceives of the African people as a child nation, composed of boys and girls, ranging in age from 120 years to 1 day. It is this group which, after 300 years, can still state with brazen effrontery that the native, the Bantu, the Kefa is still backward and savage, etc. But they still want to remain guardians, trustees of what you have of the African. In short, it is this group which has mismanaged affairs in South Africa, just as their kith and kin are mismanaging affairs in Europe. It is from this group that the most rabid race baiters and agitators come. It is members of this group who, whenever the country is not as imperialist or colonialist, but as, and okay, sorry, I missed a part here. This is the group which turns out thousands of experts on the new South African science, the native mind. Then there's the Indian foreign minority group. This group came to this country not as imperialist or colonialist, but as indentured labor. In the South Africa setup of today, this group is an oppressed minority. But there are some members of this group, the merchant class in particular, who have become tainted with the virus of cultural supremacy and national arrogance. This class identifies itself by and large with the oppressor. But significantly, this is the group which provides the political leadership of the Indian people in South Africa. And all that the politics of this class have meant up to now is preservation and defense of the sexual interests of the Indian merchant class. The downtrodden, poor, stinking coolies of Natal, who alone, as a result of the pressure of material conditions, can identify themselves with the indigenous African majority in the struggle to overthrow white supremacy, have not yet produced their leadership. We hope they will do so soon. The Africans constitute the indigenous group and form the majority of the population. So here he's actually discussing a lot of the grievances that you have been outlining. And at the end of the day, he's saying that leadership, effective leadership, can actually transform these conditions.
Yes.
And I would agree with him.
Okay, I just want to say one thing that you spoke about earlier, and then I forgot to react to that. And when Milton was speaking, then it came to me. Yeah, you were talking about those who are in Africa and who are oppressed, who are not Black people, but beside or apart from the Afrikaners that Zuma called, the only white African tribe, the Afrikaners. The only white group that can be considered an African tribe. This is what Zuma said.
Despite the fact that they are possessing all the land, but go on, yes.
I'm saying though. So beside those Afrikaners, those who oppress Africa, based on what I know, many of them they don't even claim to be Africans. So that's one thing that we should have. We should have started the debate like that. Those who oppress, they don't need to claim their Africanness. Some of them may take some passports of Kenyans and of Ivorians or Ghanaians to do business, but most of the time they don't need. Bouygues, who is exploiting Africa, or the Francophone African countries, it does not need to be an African. It's French and is operating across like 14 countries in West Africa, in Central Africa. So my point is that the conversation is about those who are white and then who, including who, apart from the Afrikaners, claim to be Africans by adoption, through the national identity, and then because they really want to be associated with Africans. This is the conversation we're having. But many of the oppressors, based on what I know, they don't even want to be called Africans.
So the issue I'm addressing, and I'm glad Sobukwe addressed it, he is actually having the conversation that I think we are having, right? That is looking at the different aspects and putting them into consideration. He is right. Those who are brought, and Lagoke, you mentioned this yesterday as we were preparing for the conversation, the Indians who were brought as indentured servants, they are victims as well of colonialism, yes. But today, how are they behaving towards Africans? And that's the thing that makes the difference. You have the ones in South Africa and in Kenya who treat Africans like trash, who I literally experienced this earlier this year when I went back home and we went to an Indian office that does rental properties. And you can see the fear in the African employees, the Kenyan employees in that room. They don't talk to them in a normal way. It's almost like a servant addressing a master. There's fear in the way they carry themselves. To me, that Indian is not African and has no right to be called an African. You have
my question now, does he even think he's African? Does he
yes,
even say that?
straight up, yes. And they are getting tax deductions. That's the thing they're going for: tax deductions, rights of land ownership, right? So their business is very much avoiding all the expenses that Africans are going through. So that unfair competition in trade and the economy against Africans, people who are doing that, and that, by the way, is not living in the spirit of Ubuntu. So if you're living in the spirit of Ubuntu, Ubuntu might be a word that is South African of the Zulu people, right? But we're talking about the principle of Ubuntu is in every African culture, including where I'm from. It's in West Africa. It's in the Yoruba community. It is everywhere.
Yes.
So we're talking about when you take action, is it going to harm your community or is it going to benefit your community? Those people who are taking large sums of land, including Africans, and they're not using it to benefit the community. Are you providing food for the community on that land? Or are you just fencing the land and no one can access it when you have Africans who have no land and a place to grow their food? We're talking about how you're treating. I recently saw two films, right? One in Namibia and one in South Africa. South Africa last year, and I believe it was last year. You all saw the video of the white people who do not allow black South Africans in the pool. And they almost drowned those young men because they wanted to swim in that pool. That to me is not that's not an African. No matter how much they claim they're African, those white people who are doing that are not Africans. When we covered Namibia, we had the story that our brother shared with us, where his grandma was passing away, and she asked to be either his mother or grandma, I believe, and she asked to be taken to the land that they own so that she can say goodbye to her ancestors, right? To see their grave. This land is currently occupied by a white person. They had to knock on the gate, and the grave is within that person's property. That owner is not an African to me, no matter how much they claim to be an African.
Okay, so I'd like to address that when you're ready.
Okay.
There are a number of issues that sister is talking about. First of all, we can aspire to Ubuntuism, but if there's no mechanism to propagate or deliver that, we're going to be aspiring for a very long time. And that is part of the problem of politics in African countries. We don't have working class parties, really. This is something that, Walter Rodney was complaining about in the 1980s. So if you don't have parties, and parties are an effective way of organizing and mobilizing, if you don't have parties whose leadership are advocating for these types of ideology, right? The promotion of culture, Pan-Africanism, Ubuntu, it's not just going to happen by itself. But we can have a different conversation just to address that alone, the need to have parties that mobilize. Now, in terms of the incidents, various incidents that happen, very egregious incidents, whether it's by Indians, whether it's by whites. And of course, they're obnoxious. But we have to be able to also accept that there are some incidents that are just as egregious, perhaps even worse, that are being conducted by melanated Africans against some other Africans. But sometimes it really grabs our skin in a very particular way when the people doing it are non-melanated people or Africans. I remember I was in a conversation many years ago. I never forgot this. This is in college. I'm at a party, and we are talking about, at that time, Rhodesia and Ian Smith. And Smiths had just killed, I don't know how many people.
Mm-hmm.
And the brother told me, he said, listen, brother, I just can't stand it when I see these white colonialists killing Africans. I don't mind if Africans are killing other Africans. But I just can't stand it, brother. White people doing this. I was just left speechless. How do you even react to something like that? I bring this up to emphasize the point I'm making, that even though it's ugly and outrageous, we should not let that become so dominant that we forget about the much of the misdeed that is holding Africa back is really being done by melanated people.
I agree. I agree.
So I just want to, Adesoji, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to quickly say something. Ariana Khan, Ambassador Arekana said the environment in which our leaders govern today is largely controlled by a combination of the legacy of the Berlin Conference and the Pact for the Continuation of Colonialization. All of those incidents that Sister Ndoku enumerated operates in countries, in spaces that have flags. Those flags, those countries are governed by people that look like you and I. Those incidents are allowed to happen by people that look like you and I.
It's not
In one second. When the Marikana incident happened in the mine in South Africa, the president of South Africa used to be an ex-miner. He was also on the line at the time, fighting those cause. But it was under his reign that fire was opened on those miners, that those miners were killed. Recently, a couple of months ago, actually, I think it was October, William Ruto and Mananagwa of Zimbabwe went to Russia and to plead with, as part of the Russian African Summit, to plead with Vladimir Putin for grains to be made available to Africans. These are two Africans with some of the richest soils on the African continent, right? And so sometimes we focus on the minutiae, but leave the macro. The macro determines the minutiae. If we put our houses in order, like Brother Milton just mentioned now, most of the political parties on the African continent don't have an ideological base, and there's a reason they don't. It's because their funding don't come from the people. If the funding came from the people, who can tell you what to do, when to do it, and how to do it? None of this will be an issue. But because most of the money comes from external parties, either, somebody who is saying, oh, I'm funding this foundation, I'm funding that, and the result, money then gets channeled into political parties, you don't have people controlling anything. Most of the elections are pre-decided. We just had an election in Congo. Many people cannot tell you the name of the people that competed against Tshisekedi. And there's a reason. Because we don't control the affairs. And so it goes back to that quote. The environment in which they govern is controlled by those legacies. And as long as that remains the case, all of the conversations we're having about defining who is what, where, and how is still predicated on those foundations. So over to you, gentlemen.
Okay, somebody wants. So can I? We wrapping up or what?
No, we have until 1:30. It's 1:08 now. Okay. Why? Someone is trying to come in?
No. I don't know. You guys, it's your show. I just saw. I think.
I see what you're saying. Yes, we'll get to the. I've been watching the chat to see whether there are questions in there. I have been watching the chat. Okay. But to also address what Adesoji just said, and like I said, Lagoke, you're no longer a visitor, so it is your show as well. we are sending you to the Shamba, so okay. Yeah, get to work. Thank you so much for letting me know about the chat.
Okay, let me say one thing, right? So yeah, for me, as I always try to be on the side of the solutions. Yeah. So we had a very nice conversation, expanded one. We could have spoken about people here in the Americas.
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen many who say that they don't want to be associated to Africa. It is true, but I have seen some Black Americans and Black Caribbean, then like people in Latin America, those Afro Afro-Latinos,
Right.
they claim their Africanness.
Mm.
Now, even though they have different national identities because of the countries that they were born in, they claim the Africanness. So when we talk about who is an African, so we have also to take that into account in this
Of
conversation.
course.
Course.
That's one,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Course,
that's
yes.
one thing I want to say. And then one of those was Kwame Ture, then who changed his name, born
More
in
African than a lot of
we have
current
more Africans, and we know what he did to preserve Kwame Nkrumah's legacy. He claimed to be Africans, and many people who are members of the All African Revolution People Party, many in the United States, they still claim to be what Africans. They don't even say they're African American; they say they're Africans. So we have also to take into account that conversation when we are talking about this. So now, as we move forward, my point is that the burden is on us. The burden is on us. We have to be more serious in the struggle because people will only give you the respect that you deserve. If you ask them to respect you, then they will respect you. Or if you do things that they consider to be very like serious, interesting, then they're going to respect you. But if yourself, you have a low self-esteem, and then because you think that it is like the product of years or centuries of colonialism, of enslavement, I think that this has to stop. And then we are doing our part. What we are doing here, or what we do in our different activities and many others that we know across the globe today, Pan-Africanism is back. And then we are promoting, like as all of you spoke, about that Ubuntu concept. So Pan-Africanism is back, and then we are claiming our value system and our culture. So as we move forward, and then we promote Ubuntu as a sense of community, of collectivism, of tolerance, but that may transcend the issue of race in order to think about a new Africa. I think that this is a step forward. Now, the leadership of Africa that Adesoji, Milton spoke about, and Adesoji spoke about. I think that yes, we don't always know the condition in which our leaders live,
True.
or that we spoke about that we agree. I've spoken about that several times. All of us here, I can now emphasize that we agree. But one thing that we have to acknowledge is this. There is an impoverishment of thinking in Africa, in the political arena. I'm not talking about scholars, and then that's another conversation. I'm talking about people who want to do politics because they have they say they have low standards because they think that the people they want to rule over have low standards. So therefore, they don't need to keep up the game. They don't need to update, or they don't need to level up. So they come using tribalism. Then they think that it is sufficient for them to be in power. But if you want to do politics, be for the working class or for the people, you need to come with like a concept. If you don't have a vision, at least you need to have a political agenda.
Yep.
Let me give you an example. I'm going to say his name. In Africa, they say we don't talk about dead people, but we talk about the dead man. So there was a guy called Jean Konambani. That's, I think, Charles Konambani, because they were brothers. One was Minister of Defense, Charles Konambani. The West African Central Bank, controlled by the French, SAO, he was the managing director of that bank. Alassane Ouattara, the current president, also was one of the managing directors of that bank before the guy. The guy wanted to be president of Ivory Coast. So he started doing interviews. I'm not talking about a regular person. I'm talking about somebody who was like the managing director of the West African Central Bank.
Yeah.
So they asked him, so when you become president, what will you do? So what is your political agenda? We want to know. He said, no, when I become president, you guys will see. Seriously, there's a guy called Tijian Cham who was like a great guy, like brilliant, working with the Credit Suisse, then many other financial institutions. They want him to be president of Ivory Coast. He became the leader of the former ruling party, Ofubonyi's party, because he's Ofubonyi's grandson. This guy, we never heard any vision that he has exposed to the Ivorians. He's going to be certainly maybe the president if that's the God's will. And then, as we speak, he became the leader of the party. It does not even have like a political agenda. People just want Alassane Ouattara to be gone and for that guy to be there because they're tired of Ouattara, but that guy do not have a political agenda. So I'm talking about like the elite in Africa. Do you understand? So when people may say those people, they come from financial institutions, okay. What about those who say that they have studied politics who want to govern those countries? So my point is that yes, we can accuse white people, and then we do that, but I think that we have to be more serious in things that we do. We have to elevate that Ubuntu spirit in each one of us, in ourselves, and we have to respect our compatriots in order to propose something that may change their lives, and this can start with a sound project or a sound vision or a sound political thought, and we are not seeing that in Africa. So when we talk about all those elements, then the question of who is an African is going to be a part of that conversation, and then many of them are not doing that. And I'm going to conclude with Ivory Coast. There was a debate who is an Ivorian, and then for 30 years, people have been fighting. There was a war. Gbagbo, Alassane Bédié, who is an Ivorian, till today, people think that if you have one parent who come from another ethnic group, or no, a parent who come from another country, you are not an Ivorian. People are still thinking like that today, and that issue has not been resolved after 30 years of civil war in Ivory Coast.
Amazing.
So
some comments maybe before we run out.
I see the energy, the Lagoke. That was a lot. Karen L asks, who will ground themselves in African history, traditional, cultural ways of knowing, and live in community with relate to the world accordingly? I don't know if there was something before that. It seems like an incomplete question. I would hazard, okay, yeah. So it's a whole, I would hazard a guess that the protective actions must come from the same place of Africans confronting the corruption, exploitative Black people who look just like them.
Yes.
Who will ground themselves in African history, traditional, cultural ways of knowing, and live in the community with relate to the world accordingly. I don't know if you can make out what the question is in that. And Karen, if you want to provide clarity with that, please go ahead and do. But brothers.
I think I have an idea. Yeah, because sometimes when we talk about Ubuntu, this is what I get from people. And they're not even great scholars. But yes, Ubuntu cannot be a workable system. Like in the let's say in this world, which
yes,
is
in which
of course.
Yes.
It's not possible. This is what they say. Yeah. And I don't understand why they think like that. And then maybe
because they're capitalists, probably, but go on.
Yeah, because of capitalism, neoliberal worldview, and the way everyone thinks that the norms of the Europeans are to be the exclusive norms of governance and management in every country of the world in the name of universalism or in the name of globalization. And of course, I don't think I think that people can practice Ubuntu, and that today we have a project about how we can have a Ubuntu political system, Ubuntu political governance. But we can talk about that another time. So some people are thinking.
You and I need to talk maybe, huh?
No,
you and I need to have.
Go ahead, sister.
You're responding to the question, Alimadi?
Yeah, I'm just agreeing with the brother. I'm saying there's no contradiction in embracing African culture or Ubuntu, and still being consistent in the modern era. So I look at people like Julius Nyerere,
That's
I
right.
look at people like Amilcar Cabral.
That's right.
In fact, Cabral, the first show that he had that was banned was only talk about African culture when he was still coming from school during the summer holidays back to Cabo Verde. And going back, they gave him a radio show, but all he talked about was culture, African culture. The Portuguese banned it because they knew the importance of African culture in liberation struggle.
Exactly. Listen, see, when it comes to profile names, I'm just not even going to bother. Our fellow community member is saying the Che Guevarans, John Browns, etc. are very, very rare. Far more common are Wazungus, who, when it serves them to do so, will ally with us, but not to a complete break with their own tribal solidarity. Ndugu Lagoke, are you familiar with that word, Wazungu?
Wazungu, I may say yes, but are you talking about white people, right?
Yes.
Wazungu, like a Swahili word,
Go
right?
ahead. Yes,
Okay,
you're familiar with it.
Yes,
But yes,
so,
there's a statement. You have any comment on that, anyone?
Oh, yeah, maybe after Soji or Milton, because, if you want to say something, I can speak.
No, it's there's nothing to say to it. It's self-explicit. Sometimes a question of tribal solidarity is one of the problems that have saddled Africa in terms of breaking away from breaking away from imperialism. I mean, if your leaders are telling you to forget your history and not to revisit it, then it shows you that you have no grounding. So what are you going to go against? And there are some parts of Europe where you so much as trip over their toe, they would follow you for eternity. But yet you as Africans are supposed to be forgiven, and it's a whole lot of how can I say it? A whole lot of issue. But over to you guys.
Yeah, it's far more common because, first of all, how are Europeans taught about non-Europeans? That's always been the big question, of course. So many Europeans are socialized to automatically presume that Europeans are superior to non-Europeans. And Africans are socialized conversely to believe that as well, that Africans are inferior to Europeans. So I can agree that the John Browns, the Che Guevaras are exceptions. And the reason is obvious. It's because of the way historically people are socialized. So you need like a different paradigm. You need to have a setting like Cuba. So people say that racism was diminished in Cuba. Obviously, it will never disappear because they set up a different system of education. So you're producing of generations of people that are socialized in a different way. In many African countries, the curriculum was never really transformed after formal independence. So white worshiping is still a big thing. I always bring up this story. I was reading one of the Ugandan newspapers, and there was a story about 2 or 3 years ago about this school. And it's so funny, ironic. It was called Sir Samuel Baker. And Baker, of course, was one of the most rabid racists. If you read his book, Albert Nyanza, where he says you should not compare Africans to the noble character of the dog. So there's a school in Uganda called Sir Samuel Baker. When Idi Amin was in power, to his credit, he changed it to an African name. But after Amin, they reverted back to Sir Samuel Baker. But what I was reading was this. The alums from the school were collecting money, not to give scholarships for African students, but to erect a statue of Samuel Baker. And they collected the money and they built the statue, which now stands in front of the school today.
Wow.
So socialization, education plays a big role in all of these things. That's how I would address that question.
Yeah. And we have a lot of work ahead of us as far as education. Aya Fubara Nelly says, we may make, and this one I guess is break it down, right? We may want to make a distinction between legal and cultural classifications. I'm legally an American and benefit from the classification as such. I am culturally an African. And that
Like
essentially
spoke about
is
that yesterday, so maybe he could tackle that.
yes.
Who's that?
You spoke about it.
Okay.
No. Yeah. It's the same thing. I'm not even going to take too much time on that. I just want to say that it can be the same thing for a white person.
Mm.
The white person can be culturally European, and the person can have like a legal status of an African. That's the conversation, and I even mentioned that a little bit brief today. So just that, and then not to spend too much time on that comment.
For me, the one thing, and this conversation cannot be decided in one sitting. Clearly, this is a conversation that we need to have over a period of time, and continue to dissect and look at the agree, disagree, continue to come back, take some things off the table, bring some in. That is how we will be approaching this. But my main concern is when you get that identity as an African, are you exploiting the indigenous peoples of that land, right? Currently, we have people in Africa who that is our land, and we cannot do business because we have competition from foreigners, right? Because they are favored legally, and the laws have been put in place. I mean, the struggle continues by Kwame Nkrumah. He literally admits that the constitution they took on was a British constitution, and they were forced to do it to get independence. But he was smart enough, grounded in an African spirit, was smart enough to learn the strategy of saying yes in that moment, but immediately changing it to become an African constitution. Yeah. So this is what's happening currently. The laws that are operating in Africa are not supporting the African. And as Adesoji was saying, the governments could do something about it, but also, again, speaking of the nuanced subject of Africa, you have sanctions, right? Our brothers who joined us for the Namibia conversation were saying the government is wary of taking certain actions because they're afraid of sanctions, like Zimbabwe, right? The Western nations punished Zimbabwe for taking back land. And now any other country that dares think of that must put that in mind, that they're going to be sanctioned.
Yes,
that's part of the story.
Well, thank you. Yeah, because yes, thank you, my brother. Yeah, people, if you want to look at the sanctions, what the European can do, we were not going to have the Mandelas, even the Nkrumahs, the Lumumbas. Yeah, we're not going to we're going to live in an eternal fear. Yes, people sometimes they don't do. Last time you remember when we were talking about Mali, Niger, and Burkina. I'm going to say the same thing again today. Many people have supported them, but have you seen them organizing like a big event, a Pan-African called the Adesoji, the Nduku, the Milton, the Maurice Canis? Have you seen that?
I'm glad you said that because it goes right into that. So look at that as your answer.
Yeah, they do not do that. So and even the president of the Central African Republic, finally we can see that the guy is a fraud. I don't like to talk about that. We prayed for him. We say he was doing the right thing, but now he's going to get rid of the Russian or Wagner, and he wants to go now and take like an American military, sign a military agreement with the United States. In the meantime, in 10 years, the guy has not been able to transform his country so that at least people can feed themselves. Seriously?
So I'm glad you pointed that. What do you think about establishing? And this is the type of question that will get us. This is where we're heading, right? The action items that we can take on. What do you think? And Lagoke, you've addressed this several times. What do you think about establishing a Pan-African internal affairs, I guess, organization which specializes in mediating our internal disputes and resolving internal differences, as well as protecting our freedom fighters?
Yeah, I don't know. Listen, how we can protect the freedom fighters. Listen, we came to, we were we were created by God. We are here. We should not die. But if you die, at least build like a strong legacy so that your legacy can survive you, and your legacy can be that of Nkrumah, who is still inspiring millions of Africans, that of Sankara, who is inspiring millions of Africans, that of Che Guevara, Amika Cabral, and all of them. So for me, because I hear that, oh yes, how are we going to protect people? What can we do? Milton, I'm taking a plane. I'm taking a plane to go to a place for a conference. If on that plane, the Europeans have decided that I should die, because maybe I'm sleeping, somebody comes and touches me like this.
Right.
I think it's a mosquito or like whatever. Or they give me like a drink or I eat on the plane.
Yep.
If I die, then I'm supposed to mean that I was supposed to be dead.
Yeah.
So each one of us need to do what he her has to do, or he or she has to do in order to avoid death.
Right.
Because when you are dead, you are gone. And there are
Right.
many people who lose their lives just because they were not cautious enough, and then that's it. So for me, it's not like there will be a group of people to try and see who is supposed to be preserved and who is not supposed to be preserved. But people are trying. When Thabo Mbeki was there, and some our leaders somehow they find a way in order to try and mediate when there are conflicts, and then we need many more of those things today, and that will be my answer to that question.
Right. We definitely need to write. We need to document. That's why, as you say, Nkrumah is still teaching us today.
That's it.
Because of his books.
Yeah,
Amilcar Cabral, because of his books.
That's it. And there are many, many people who do great things, but they don't write.
Yeah.
And Nkrumah had like a clear understanding of what he wanted to do. So that's why today people still talk about him. Of course, we can go back to his achievements. It is because of his political thought. And then that is like compass for African regeneration. And this is what we need to do.
Yeah. That's our best.
It's a way of surviving. It's a way of defeating death too.
Yes.
And just to I agree with you, but I do agree that an organization is needed, a collective organization where everyone is an equal member coming to the table to analyze the barriers and to figure out solutions. And the well-being and progress of Africa and defense of Africa should be the thing that keeps us centered in that conversation. So hopefully we put that together soon. It shouldn't be a matter also of who gets a certain title in it. So hopefully we can put our egos down for that conversation.
Of course.
Yeah.
Egos.
Listen. Please support the work we're doing. We're going to be starting journalism conversations that we will be broadcasting in the month of February. To support the work, you can join our Patreon family at patreon.com/Kumbukeni. Our membership ranges. You will see it when you go there. Or you can subscribe here on YouTube. Lagoke, it's always good to have you, and we will have you back again. Like I said, you're now a member of the family. And thank you to those in the chat who participate and make this an engaging conversation that's not just made up of us on the studio, but is involving the whole community. These are tough issues, but they must be discussed so that we can solve the problem of Africa, because we are not living the ideal life. And nowhere, by the way, not on the continent, not in the United States, not in the Caribbean, are melanated Africans living the ideal life that we would like to live. And unless you all want to tell me there's a place and I need to go there as soon as possible. Brothers, any last words before we close?
A luta continua.
Luta continua.
We just have to do our work and then put out some concepts that through which we can claim our Africanness. That is one of the reasons why I am not defending socialism. That's one of the reasons why I can never claim capitalism. That's one of the reasons why when I discovered Ubuntu in 2002, most of my research has been about Ubuntu philosophy as a way for me to claim my African identity, my Africanness, and the African paradigm around which to propose a cultural, political, economic, and social revolutions for the betterment of the African continent.
Also, I would like to leave the last word with Kwame Nkrumah. We have awakened. We will not sleep anymore. From today now on, there's a new African in the world.
Hey, I think it's a good closing word. Thank you, everyone.
Asanteni.
Kwaherini, siku njema. And yes, as I put in the chat, save the date, May 4th. More details will come through. Asanteni. Kwaherini.